Hello, friends. What's going on, guys? It's Grade School Monday. It's a good day. It's a good morning. How are y'all? What's going on out there? Let me know in the chat. How are you feeling? What are you excited to learn about today? What are you excited to talk about today? We're going AMA style again today. I'm here for you guys. Whatever is on your mind, whatever you want to talk about in the realm of color grading, I'm more than game to discuss. So yeah, let me know. How you feeling? Where are you coming from? What are you excited to discuss today? Let's get a roll call going on. Who's in the room? My buddies Christian and Annie are here with me. What's going on, guys?
Hello.
I'm feeling
Hey
very
guys.
special because I have two of my color grading buddies here with me. It's going to be a rowdy session. Oh, Nathan's in the house. What's up, buddy? From the free state of Maine. Cool, Jeffrey. Yeah, we're back on. I can't decide. There are these some tech stack details that are not going to be that interesting to you guys. There are 2 levels or 3 levels of latency that I guess you can do with YouTube, and I'm still like trying to Goldilocks my way to the perfect one because I really crave like the interaction of getting to be in a Zoom or in a like in-person session with you guys, which is more the low latency end of things. But then I watch the recordings back later and I'm like, man, that didn't look that good. So the Goldilocks thing continues. I think we're somewhere in the middle today. So there's a little bit of a lag with my roll call or other questions to the room, but I'm glad we're all here together. Or maybe y'all are just like, when's this dude gonna stop asking me to say stuff and teach me something about color grading? I don't know. Maybe it's just a quiet room. Regardless, I'm glad to be here with you guys. It's gonna be a really fun session. I love Grade School Mondays, and let's get into it. Drop your questions in the chat. What's on your mind? What do you want to discuss today? Let me know. Let's see. Oh, am I competing with WWDC? Is that what's going on? Oh, Connor's in the house. What's up, bro? Sam's here. Rich. Dang, we got some heavy hitters in the house. Amazing. All right, well, let's see. Oh, wait, I see. I, I've got 2 friends here today, Christian and Annie, and I'm about to take over and start doing y'all's job and fielding questions from the chat. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to shut up. I think we might have one question at the top of the chat. Christian or Annie, let me know what we got.
Okay, you may have already read it, but I want to understand how much brightness should we grade at since I use a MacBook Pro 16 and it has XDR display with 1600 nits display. And I've read somewhere that SDR we need to grade 100 nits. So can you please share the preset or setting I need to dial up on my Mac as I can't afford a monitor?
Okay, sure. Yeah, great question. So let's peak luminance. What do we need to master or grade our image to? So it comes to mind, I've mentioned this a bunch, I think, in the last couple episodes of Grade School, but I'm going to recommend it again to you guys today. If you want to go well, I'm going to make a couple recommendations for you. This, of course, touches into the realm of HDR because like the core idea of HDR, if we want to talk about like not what can be true, not what's possible, but what is the fundamental difference between HDR and SDR, it's really just one thing. It's that you can have a brighter peak luminance than is possible in a traditional SDR image. That's the idea of HDR. So that kind of overlaps with what we're talking about right now. But to keep it really simple, let's just talk about peak luminance on your display and how you can manage that. So easiest way to think about this, SDR, by the way, there's no standard that says we should grade to 100 nits. The recommendation that I was going to make to you guys, again, qualified recommendation because this is an HDR deep dive that you need to have a little bit of HDR sort of like foundation with before it's going to make any sense. But my friend Steve Yedlin just put out a really, really fascinating 2-hour deep dive talk that he gave at Photochem here in Los Angeles. Well, it's weird for me to say here in Los Angeles. I actually, secret to you guys, some of y'all might not know, I don't actually live in Los Angeles anymore. I'm pretty close. I still have an office in Los Angeles, but I live like an hour and a half outside of the city now. So here in the Southern California area, Steve gave a talk at Photochem, a film lab and color grading facility about HDR. Fascinating conversation, very deep diving. So get some fundamentals first, maybe before you bite that off. But reason I bring it up is, as Steve points out in that conversation, there actually is no standard written down anywhere for how bright SDR should be. So like or a Rec 709 or BT 1886, whatever you want to call it, there is no standard. So in terms of like, do I need to get my 1600 nit display down to 100 nits? Not necessarily. And I can tell you guys that like in this room, in my office, I actually drive my displays at 120. Why 120? Because I like it. There's really no like hard and fast rhyme or reason to it. It would be higher if I was in a less controlled lighting condition. Like if I had to grade with the amount of light that's in this room right now so you guys can see me, I would probably drive up my peak luminance on my display. I don't know what I would drive it up to, but probably closer to 150 or maybe 160, something like that. So that's the first thing to understand is there's no like explicit demand that you must hit 100 nits on the nose. And then I would say in terms of actually getting that number, I don't know if there's a great way to correlate. You know what? I don't have this handy. Best I can tell you is the last time I had my MacBook Pro calibrated by a professional, which is a thing that you can do, and he calibrated it to 120 nits per my preference and per my request, and he actually gave me a slider position. So like, if you look in your system settings here, this won't even work actually for me right now because I'm not on an Apple display, I'm realizing. But you can imagine in your mind's eye that brightness slider in system preferences displays. That brightness slider, he gave me a screenshot of where I should put that brightness slider to get 120 nits off of the display after having measured it with his device. That brightness slider was at around 35% on my MacBook Pro. This was a couple years ago, trying to hit 120 nits. So I would say, roughly speaking, set your brightness slider to around 33%. And if it looks good, feels good, doesn't feel like it's like repelling your vision, it's probably pretty good. And ultimately, you're not needing to hit an explicit exact standard. You just need to make it comfortable for yourself, if that makes sense. So that's kind of how I would approach that. Kind of a long answer to a simple, good question, but hopefully illuminates some other things along the way.
Okay, how do you deal with different resolution and different aspect ratio footage? Do you debayer first all the footage into common resolution or handle individual footage separately during conform?
Ooh, this one's juicy. Okay, you guys ready to dive deep for a minute? I got some thoughts. I've got a system to share with you guys for this. It's a very simple system that I don't see anyone else using, so you're going to get to check it out here today. So here's how I think about things. There are 3 stages. We actually talk about this in the Colorist Career Accelerator, which just wrapped up maybe a month or so ago. We'll be doing another one later this year. So if you're interested in going deep on all dimensions of your professional color grading level craft, whether you actually are working professionally or not, if you want to get to that level of practice so that you can do better work professionally, so you can start working professionally, stay tuned. When that date starts to approach for the next round of CCA, then we announce it here on the channel. And if you're not on my email list, if you haven't grabbed any of my cool free stuff, my Kodak 2383 film emulation, my exposure chart, my mid-grade cheat sheet, any of those cool things, grab one of those things. They're cool anyway. You should be using them anyway. And then you're going to be on my email list and you'll be the very first to know when we're doing our next round of that course later this year. But going back to the topic at hand, how do we handle geometry? This is a concept that I talk about in the Colorist Career Accelerator that I call the geometry pipeline. So we've talked a lot here on the channel about our color pipeline, i.e. our color management, right? So our color pipeline goes something like this, where we're going to go from, let's go back over here to this level. So with this image, I am transforming from my input space into my working space, right? And then I'm going from my working space into my output space. By the way, I'm using a DRT called OpenDRT. It's the latest version from a very smart dude called Jed Smith. Highly recommend this DCTL. It's super cool. Maybe Christian or Annie can find a link to that. I think Jed's GitHub is github.com/JedyPod, JEDYPOD, if you guys want to transcribe that in the chat for me. But I promise there's a reason I'm talking about color management when we're supposed to be talking about geometry. This is a 2-stage or a 3-piece process when we talk about color management, right? Input space, working space, output space. Very similar when it comes to geometry. The 3 things we need to think about anytime we're trying to answer a question like yours, or even a smaller question of like, all right, I've got this red footage that was shot at such and such resolution and aspect ratio, and I got to put it on my screen. How am I going to do that? We need to think about things in 3 stages, okay? Number 1 stage, what was captured? What was the resolution of the image that was captured, right? Now we're going to skip ahead. We're going to skip the middle. We're going to go to the last stage. So we've got the bookends. Number 1 is how was it captured? Number 3 is what screen am I trying to put it on, right? So like right now, I've got a 3840 by 2160, 16 by 9 display, okay? That's the output. Most of us get that far. Most of us recognize, okay, well, I got to do something between here and there unless I just happen to have shot 1920 by 1080 and I'm going to a 1920 by 1080 and I don't want to do anything else. I would say that's kind of in the minority of scenarios, at least for me. Most of the time we have difference in resolution or difference in aspect ratio or both between our camera and our display. And in the case of our question here today, it's an even slightly more complex scenario where you have different cameras with aspects or resolutions that may differ from one another and which probably differ as well from the output. Okay, so we need to add a third stage into this process of thinking about the geometry of our image and how it changes when we're color grading. We start in a certain place, we need to end up in a certain place, meaning our resolution and our aspect ratio for our display. We need to do a middle piece, okay? This middle piece is what I'm gonna call your canvas, all right? So here's the exercise that I always ask my clients to go through, because this comes up with a lot with clients and you have to coordinate the answers that you're gonna be sort of figuring out for yourself to your question and to this question in general of how am I going to manage the geometry of my image end to end? To answer that question, you really need to coordinate with your client, which means you need to have a pretty technical conversation with them along the lines of the one we're having now. So here's the way that I always frame it to my clients to make it really easy. I ask them, okay, forget about like particular screens and specs and aspect ratios for a minute. And just think about in the abstract, what would you like your canvas to be? Specifically the aspect ratio. Would you want a 16:9, a 1:8:5:1, a 2:1, a 2:3:9, a 4:3? Like what aspect ratio would you want? And then what resolution is the highest resolution that you want to deliver to? So what that might sound like would be, hey, I want to do 4K at a 2.39:1 aspect ratio, okay? What that means is regardless of how I'm monitoring right now, and regardless of whatever deliverables I might be creating in the future, I need to have a canvas, an intermediate geometrical stage of my geometry pipeline that is perfectly representative of that desired aspect ratio and resolution. You guys follow me so far? It's going to get clearer. We'll get hands-on here in Resolve in just a second, but we need to understand these three pieces first of all. Where are we starting? What is our canvas that we're mapping into, which is often different from what we are monitoring? And finally, what are we monitoring? Now, I'm going to show you what this looks like in practice and how beneficial it is to think about this in these three organized, distinct steps, as opposed to just, I don't know, make this somehow fit onto that screen and we'll call it a day. So check this out. So if we take a look at, let's see if we've got some kind of image that represents what we're trying to do. Let me open up my Resolve here. Where are my controls at? Ah, there we go. Oh no, my cool little circle went away. I guess I'll have to live without the circle for a minute. And you guys can let me know if I'm covering up critical information on my Resolve. So, okay, this is a great example here. Check this out. So we've got this image and we're actually going to ignore the geometry of it for a minute. And let's just do some research. So I've got this image. Let's find it in my media pool. And we're going to take a look at its properties. Okay, so if I scroll over here, I can see this image starts with a resolution of 2880 by 2160. This is I told you guys, deep dive, but like grab a notebook if you haven't already. Like you're not going to get all this the first time, but like this is like the best free lesson on geometry that you're going to get all year. So grab a notebook, take some notes. So 2880 by 2160. Here's the first thing I need to do. I'm going to grab a calculator. We're going to get a sense of not only what is the resolution, but what's the aspect ratio. So let's check this out. 2880 by 2160. So we're going to take 2880 and divide it by 2160. I'm going to get 1.33333 something or other as my aspect ratio. Does anybody know what that represents in like the way we normally talk about aspect ratios? That's a 4:3, right? But that's not quite right, is it? Because this image is quite wide. It's not square. 4:3 is a square format. This is like wider than 16:9. So what gives? Well, let's take a look at our clip attributes here. This is something else that we need to be aware of and mindful of when we're building our geometry pipeline. Pixel aspect ratio. What does that mean? What that means is that every pixel is twice as wide as it is tall. So what does that mean? Our effective resolution is not 2880 by 2160, but 2880 times 2, 5760 by 2160. So if we take 5760 and we divide it by 2160, we get 2.66. Now, I love using this example because it's a really good one. This is a native aspect ratio, captured negative, of 2.66 to 1. That's real wide. That's like, I think that's wider than like a Sergio Leone movie. Bonus points to anyone who can tell me without Googling it, without looking it up and cheating, what is the aspect ratio of like Once Upon a Time in the West? I can't remember off the top of my head. I think those are 2 4s probably, but someone let me know. So we've got our 2.66, and let's say for sake of this example, our canvas that we've stated is what we actually want the viewer to see is a 4K at 2.39 to 1. Okay. So you guys can see how breaking this into pieces, like at first sort of like examination of what I'm walking you through, you might have had the reaction of like, dude, why are you adding a step to this? It sounds complicated enough. You've got the starting point of the resolution of the camera, then you've got the destination point of the monitor, and your great solution to simplify it, Colin, is to add a third step. That doesn't seem very good, but there's a good reason for it, and that's because it's actually helpful to chunk these things into separate pieces, and there's other benefits we're going to talk about too. We'll get to those in a minute. But if we look at what we're doing right now, it's plenty just to figure out, okay, how am I going to fit 2.66 with a 57 by 60 width into a 2.39 with a 4K width? That's plenty without needing to worry about how am I then going to flow that into a monitor which has yet another aspect ratio, right? We actually want to chunk it into steps because it makes it simpler, not because it makes it more complex. So stay with me. You guys are doing great. So 2.66, that is my native aspect ratio of this image. So the next question that comes up, and these are the inflection points, guys, like where whether you're doing this for yourself or you're having a conversation with your client, you can't get around the fact that you need to do some thinking at certain points. Like 2.66 to 1 and 2.39 to 1 are different aspect ratios. This is where there's no substitute for thinking and planning. You have to know what you want to do about that. So like, how do you want to handle that? And the 2 ways that we can handle that are that we can scale our image to fit. Let's actually go ahead and I'm going to skip around a little bit here. And we're going to, no, I take it back. We're going to stay right where we're at. So our 2 options here is that we can scale our image to fit, meaning that we're going to end up with some black bars top and bottom so that we're seeing the whole width of the image, even though that doesn't cover the full height of the image. We scale it to that level. That would be scaling to fit. Follow that? The other option would be scaling to crop, meaning we're going to lose a little bit of that width on the left and right hand side in order to fill our 2.39 canvas. Now, this is one of the benefits that I alluded to a moment ago of working in these 3 stages, is that when you have an explicit canvas that is exactly what you want, you can have a hard and fast rule. They're like, hey, in my timeline, at the stage of mapping from camera into the timeline, that part of the process should never, ever, ever introduce any padding of any sort. You guys know what I mean when I say padding? I'm talking about this black bars on the top and bottom. They could be black bars on the left and right. This is something that Resolve or any image processing tool is going to do automatically for you when you tell it, hey, fit this thing of a different aspect ratio into this canvas with a different aspect ratio. What's it going to do? It's going to fit it in there and it's going to pad it top and bottom. Only other option would be either to crop things off, which if you're saying fit, you can't do, or to stretch things out, right? Like that's not right. We don't want to distort things vertically or horizontally. So the only thing it can do is pad the image. But if you follow this system that I'm breaking down here, you can just have the hard and fast rule. That never happens. We never do that. This is a great thing. Write this part down. You should never have padding, letterboxing, pillar boxing, whatever you want to call it, as active image area. You follow what I'm saying? Because like for one thing, this simplifies things to say like, all right, I'm never going to use a scaling that's going to create any kind of padding. The other problem, you guys may have seen this before, is if you try to then go and grade an image that has been scaled and it has padding in the active image area, if you do like, I don't know, like, let's look at this right now. Like this has been scaled to fit inside of my 16 by 9. And so like you might ask, like, geez, Colin, why are you making this so complicated? It looks like it's already right. You're already kind of getting the widescreen reproduced in your 16 by 9. But what you'll notice is if we have this scaled, let me just make sure I'm got my resolution set here correctly. And if we're looking at the right point in our timeline, check this out. I'm actually grading the padding, right? Like the black is moving with the rest of the image. If this is meant to be dead space, that's only a conceit for fitting the image onto the screen, that shouldn't move. I shouldn't be able to grade that, right? That's one of the downsides of just fitting things however you want. So instead, we're going to say we never pad at this input stage. That's going to happen later. Okay, so that's step one. We've got to get this into our timeline. So how are we going to define that canvas that I talked about a minute ago? Well, I said I want it to be 4K at a 2.39. So that's going to be 4096 wide. And there's probably going to be a preset for this in Resolve. There actually is not. So this is where, oh no, here it is. 4096 by 1716, DCI scope 2.39. If you want to validate that or any other aspect ratio ever, grab your calculator, 4096 divided by 17, was it 1716? What kind of motion imaging professional am I? I can't even remember that number. There you go, 2.386. So that is our aspect ratio that we want, okay? So if we say 4096 by 1716, now we have our canvas, right? This is what we are mapping the image into when we tell Resolve how to do our mapping. We're not even going to worry about our video monitoring and stuff quite yet, okay? So if we set this like so, and now on our input scaling, we're going to change this around. Instead of saying scale entire image to fit, we're going to say scale full frame with crop. That means, hey, Resolve, I have thought long and hard about what you are dropping this image into geometry-wise, and I want it to fill that canvas, always. I don't ever want padding. Remember, anytime you say scale entire image to fit, unless those resolutions just happen to match between camera and canvas, you're going to get padding of some sort, which is problematic for a number of reasons. But if you just say scale full frame with crop, and you've set things up properly, meaning you've selected the right canvas and you've got an image that you've thought through for that specific canvas you're trying to get to, watch what happens. Let's actually, to make this a good example, we're going to do the third step as well here in our project settings. So what have we done now? We've said, hey, my canvas is this. It is this resolution. It has this aspect ratio. I'm going to map my camera, whatever its properties are. We now know it's about a 2.66, 5760 wide image. We're going to map that 5760, 2.66 aspect ratio image into our 4K 2.39 canvas. Okay, a lot of numbers, but hopefully you're tracking with me. So we're going to map that into there. Now what are we going to do? How are we going to finish the geometry pipeline? That's steps 1 and 2. Well, the final step of the geometry pipeline is what are we going to, right? Well, I know that too. So for this, we're going to say 3840 by 2160. And I'm going to go to my image scaling here as well. So there's 2 places I need to do that with my video monitoring if you're using an external monitor. Image scaling, we're going to go over here. I've set my input scaling already. Output scaling, I'm going to uncheck this box and I'm going to say my output resolution should be 3840 by 2160. This has nothing to do with the canvas that I've chosen. This is just me saying that is the resolution of the monitor that I'm going to. And just like I always want my canvas to match my ideal perfect scenario, perfect aspect ratio for my project, I want my output resolution to exactly match my display that I'm going to. Eliminates guesswork. It makes it simpler to select this option because it's always going to be the same. It's going to be what is your destination display resolution. Okay. So we've got 3840 by 2160. And here, mismatched resolution files, this is kind of a confusing name for this dropdown. Really what this means is what should I do if my timeline resolution that you've selected here does not match the output resolution that you've selected here. So it's more like mismatched resolution timeline, but you get the idea. Here is where we're going to say, yes, scale the entire image to fit. Every pixel of that canvas is precious to me. I don't want it cropped. I don't want it stretched. I don't want it distorted in any way. What's the way to do that? We now know, we've talked about it multiple times, we have to pad, right? Because we're trying to take a very wide 2.39 image and fit it into a narrower 16 by 9 frame. What are the 2 options to make that work? We either got to chop things off left and right, which we don't want to do at this stage because our canvas is our source of truth, or we're going to need to pad top and bottom so that we can get the full width within that smaller available width. You with me? So once I do this, the fun part is we're not going to see all that much change here. Watch, let's hit save. And we're just getting that little punch factor on the left and right. That's what was needed to get us from 2.66 to 2.39. So that's the breakdown there, guys. That's your geometry pipeline. It runs totally in parallel and independent of your color management pipeline. And I encourage you all to really start thinking about how am I pathing the geometry of my camera negative especially in the case of having multiple formats for your source, into my canvas and then out to my display. And the fun part is once you define that canvas, once you know what that canvas is and what you want it to be, everything else is automatic. Your input should always be scale full frame to crop, meaning scale my image down to the resolution, but don't allow any padding to be introduced at that stage of the geometry pipeline. So you're always going to scale full frame with crop. And then for your output, you're always going to scale entire image to fit. So those two are going to be constant. And then all you need to do beyond that is define your timeline resolution here and your output resolution here. So that's the kind of simple couple step process. What's my canvas? What's my output resolution? And then making sure that you've set scale full frame with crop for your input and scale entire image to fit for your output. Okay, that's got to be a record even for me of longest grade school answers, but that's, like I said, a very unique approach that I take to this stuff that helps simplify it so much for me, helps me avoid like standing there scratching my head in the room with clients, and helps me get like good results and not have to deal with like, oh, we just moved the black point of the pillar boxes. That's weird. And what do I do about it? Now do I have to add output blanking or some other weird thing? This is a great system. So I hope you guys can benefit from it.
Casey, I think your volume's way lower in comparison to ours.
Okay. Let's see what I can do about that. I mean, it's looking... Sorry about that, guys. It might be because I'm panning to all this way and it gets a little bit lower there. Yeah, let me see if I can maybe take Annie and Christian down a little bit. All right, we'll see if that's better. Let us know if we need to keep tweaking it, guys.
When grading, how do we know when it's too much?
Good question. Good idea. When grading, how do we know when it's too much? So I forget who shared this with me. It's a line that someone, a colorist friend, related to me like some time ago, and I can't remember who told it to me. But and if that colorist is here in the room or watching the recording later, like put your hand up and let me know, because I use this all the time and I never credit you because I can't remember when I had the conversation. But the line is, if you don't go, you won't know. So the way you know you've gone too far is to go too far. Like that might sound simple, but there's an edge past which you're like one of my big principles in color grading is we want to surround the problem. We want to surround the solution is a better way to put it. Okay. So we know, like, you know, if we look at, let's just kind of build something out here. I'm going to flip to, I'm going to use the area reveal transform here. And then we're going to get contour in place. And we're going to kind of use contour to explore this. Contour is my look development plugin for any of you guys who don't already know. You can grab a free trial of it. There'll be a link to it in the description for the video today. Let's take a look here. So I'm going to just grab one of my looks here. One of my look presets. There we go. Let me just check. Do I have something funky going on here? Yeah, we don't want this right now because I'm not on my... I'm going to turn off my macOS viewing transform because I'm not on my Apple display. Okay, so we've got this image graded up, this kind of look built out. Let me just double check my color management. Cool. So the question that comes up is like, all right, how far is too far? And we can think about it in terms of like look development, or we can even just tap over and start grading here. And let me grab my tree. And we can look at our prime node and say like, all right, so what's our process going to be? Well, we're always going to set our exposure first. A lot of the time, have I gone too far? It typically relates to exposure, to balance, or to saturation, like to your first three nodes, okay? So if we say like, all right, I'm going to set my, not that knob. Every time I grab an HDR knob that's not the one I want, I shudder a little bit. So we can say like, all right, so let's say we're going to go a little bit moodier, and then I'm going to go back to my primaries and just kind of shape this out, like try to go moody, but feel like I can really see everything. Okay, so like there would be my primary grade on this image. And the question becomes like, you know, like let's work our way through the process. So I'm now going over to my balance node, and let's say, I don't know, like we want to warm things up. Okay, so something like that. So this is a great spot to evaluate it right here. Like, how do I know when I've gone too far? I think the first thing is to go too far for sure. So you want to feel like, all right, if the goal was to give this like a really warm kind of yellowy like tint or wash that's really pushing the image up into that area. Well, we know how much too little is, right? Like this is too little. And by the way, isn't that funny? Like looking at that comparison, like just a second ago, this seemed totally normal and now it feels so blue, right? But if we know like, all right, that's not far enough, the other end of it, we want to find that other goalpost. Like, okay, I know for a fact that is too far. And so I'm going to kind of flip this around and say, what is the benefit of making sure you go too far? You follow me? Because like, even when you ask the question, you're asking it, I think, from a frame of mind of like, not how do I know when I've gone too far, but like, how do I know when I've found the right spot and not to go any further, right? But it's actually beneficial to go too far. How you know when you've gone too far is it looks too far. It doesn't look good. And if you're not sure, you haven't gone far enough. Like really push it. Like if you don't go, you won't know. I love that. So like really push it somewhere dumb. Like if you're not convinced that this is totally outlandish, push it further. Like until you're like, okay, I would never sign off on this, right? This is just too much, too many helpings of a thing that I would generally be interested in. Okay. So now we've got a really valuable thing. We've got goalposts. We've got a perimeter around our solution. Our solution is somewhere in between here and here, right? So now the question becomes, what is my process to calibrate and find the right balance of things? I'm taking some liberty with your question, but I hope I'm fundamentally answering what you've asked and also answering a maybe even more important kind of underlying question. So if we take a look at this, there's lots of different things you guys can do here, but I've talked about one of these before. Sometimes if you're like, all right, I have found too far, it's exactly what I want, it's just too much of a good thing, I could go and start to kind of wind my trackball back the direction it came. Or if you're like, man, I just really like where this is at, your other option is to go to your key here and just turn your key output gain and start pulling it back. So if anyone's not familiar, key output gain just controls, like, you can think of it as the intensity or the opacity of your node. So right now, key output gain 0, this node ain't doing anything, right? And at full strength, it's doing everything. If I go somewhere in between, this is half of the adjustment. And so this can be a great way of finding your balance point of what you're trying to do. Because now, what I love about key output gain in this application is it turns 3 dimensions or multiple adjustments, like whatever you're doing in that node, into one knob. Now it's just like, okay, how far between nothing and everything do you want to land? Okay, so that would be my prescription there. How do you know if you've gone too far? Because you've gone too far. If you're not sure you've gone too far, push it further and then walk it back either manually by unrolling your, like unwinding your trackball if it's a balance adjustment, or just working backwards with whatever you're doing in your adjustments. Or if you're like, no, dude, this is really good, I just want less of it, grab that key output gain and start to walk it backwards. Okay.
Okay, have you had a chance to try out JPlog 2, and what do you think of it as a proposed working space in coding?
I've played with it a little bit. I can tell you I've spent more time just looking at the spec and looking at some of the proposed benefits. I'll be candid with you guys, I don't see proposed benefits there. The benefits that are being discussed are, I think, a little double talky, and in some cases they speak to things that are already true of other log encodings. So things that are touted as unique to JPlog2 are actually not unique to JPlog2, like even spacing between stops. All log curves have even spacing between stops. There's also other dubious things like the way that the dynamic range is allotted so that you can get all this extra headroom. I forget what the technical spec is off the top of my head, but there's, this claim of like it being able to encompass a much wider range of dynamic range than other log curves can. I think the problem is at a certain point that starts to feel weird. Like it's not actually a benefit anymore. It starts to become more of a problem in terms of how it feels in your hands. Because remember, like, as you guys know, like I grade different projects in different ways, and I still definitely want to be able to talk to y'all here on YouTube about like, hey, if you want to get in there and grade and do like what I just did in the prime node here. So in this prime node, I dropped my linear gain. That would work fine with JPlog2, but that's because that's not actually happening in JPlog2. That's happening in a linear space. So that would be, even if my working setup right now was JPlog2, I would be decoding out of JPlog2 and applying linear gain, because that's where you're going to get the best results for adjusting exposure. And then if you look at my other adjustments here, this lift gamma gain adjustment that I made here, it's going to feel weird in JPlog2 because the distribution of where highlights are living in that curve is starting to feel odd to me, because you've got all of this dynamic range between your gray and your peak, and your gray hasn't been dropped down at all like the way it is in, say, Aries log C4 curve, which I think is also weird, probably a worse compromise of like, well, you're going to have a more sensible amount of the curve dedicated to the additional high-end dynamic range of the image, but now your middle gray is really low. So remember, this is a really great thing to talk about. If you guys want to dive a little bit deeper on this, there's a video that we did maybe a year or so ago on color space awareness, which is really what I'm talking about. But remember that lift, gamma, and gain and their behavior and their feel depend on the log curve that you are grading in. Okay, so like just as a simple example, let's say we don't want to adjust our exposure, and we're just going to like look at this adjustment. By the way, does anyone kind of dig this like very like orangey yellowy washy thing that we ended up doing here? It's kind of cool. So let's go back over to our primaries here, and just for sake of the example, I'm going to kind of go further with this. So let's just say we're really going to do some stuff here. I don't know if this is right or what I would want to do, but like it's a vibe. Okay, so like we're really spinning our wheels now and doing stuff. Now check this out. I just want to like give concrete visual on a statement I just made a minute ago, that like your primaries depend on your log curve, right? So if I flip this and say, hey, just for the duration of this node resolve, I want you to flip me into the ACES CCT log curve, then apply these primaries adjustments that I made right here, and then flip me back into my working operational stock log curve of DaVinci Intermediate. Well, what's interesting there is like, on one hand, you're like, all right, well, we're just moving into ACES CCT and then back. That should be net zero, right? We're just walking into a room next to the one that we're in, and then we're walking right back into the room where we started, right? Like no change should come about as a result of walking into the next room and then walking back in here, right? But what did we do in that room, right? What did we do in that room instead of in this room? Now we are making our primary adjustment in that space. So it's for that reason that when we make this change, we'll see a change in the image. Okay? And if you think your way through it for a minute, that means that I'm getting a different response in my tools, and that my tools, if I'd made this adjustment in ACES CCT, they would have felt different when I was making this adjustment, and I would have made different choices, and it may or may not have felt the same level of intuition. Like I don't usually grade in ACES CCT, so I can't really speak to the feel of it so much, and it's not as dramatic of a difference as something like JP Log 2, although actually it's a decent comparison. Highish gray point, higher dynamic range. It's actually a decent comparison between the two. But I would say like you're going to get different feel, different response in these curves. Now that's something I can't stand here and tell you, oh, that feel that you're going to get with that log curve, that's wrong. And the feel that you're going to get in this log curve, that's right. But I will say that for me, the feel of having 0 to mid gray mapped into a sort of normal dynamic or a normal range within a log curve of like 0 to 0.4 roughly, and then having from 0.4 to point up capture way more latitude than is present in like DaVinci Intermediate, for me that starts to feel weird. So I don't mean this to turn into a long critique of JP Log 2. By the way, Josh Pines is a straight up ledge. I could not be a bigger fan of Josh Pines and Dotto as well. I love the stuff those guys are doing together. So that's just my take on the JP Log 2 thing, is I think it solves some problems that I don't necessarily see as problems, and it makes some claims that I don't quite see how they are distinct from existing solutions. That'd be my take.
Is there such a thing as lifting shadows in a photometric stop without affecting midtones or highlights? How would you do it?
Photometric is a tricky word, I would say. There's such a thing as doing something along those lines. Like, here's how I think about it. We actually used to have pop quiz. Who's been hanging out here on the channel long enough to remember the previous? Let's make this really simple for a second. So I've always had 3 labeled nodes at the beginning of my template node graph, right? Or not always, a long time, but I've had multiple iterations of a template node graph where the first 3 nodes are labeled, right? What changed? Here's the current first 3 nodes in my template node graph. What did they used to be? So I got prime, balance, and sat. I worked them in that order. I just intentionally have placed balance before prime and sat for reasons that we can talk about in another conversation. Anybody remember what the prior iteration of that was? Think fast because I'm filling it in. So we now have prime, balance, sat. It used to be exposure, ratio, and balance, right? I want to talk about this one because this really speaks to the question. Your ratio, my concept in this prior node graph, this is actually different than what it is now, but my concept in this prior node graph was I'm trying to, in as simplistic of a way as possible, control the ratio of the image. Here's another good way to think about it. Are you guys familiar with the term slope? Anybody ever heard this before? Or slope offset power? Slope is contrast, essentially. And if we think about the way that any image is going to be created or any contrast is going to be introduced, generally what we're going to see is, like, let's plot a ramp showing what we're doing with our output here. So take a look at this. So if we compare what we're doing here to nothing, what's changing? Answer this for yourself. You might already know where I'm going, or you might have never seen something like this before, but try to give me your good, best level answer as if we're standing together having this conversation. What's changing? I don't need technical answers necessarily. I just need a broad categorization, a broad characterization of what's changing. Here's what I would say. There's two things changing here. In the middle, my slope, literally how steep this line is getting, slope just makes intuitive sense to me, probably because I love skiing, and I wish I got to ski more than I do. This year is going to be the year. We're going to take the little ones out and get them going. It's been a tough couple of years for new parents to get young kids out on the slopes, but this year is going to be the year. We'll get them started young. I love skiing, so when you tell me the slope is steeper, that makes sense to me because that's a big part of the calculation that you make when you're skiing. I'm like, am I going to go down that? I don't know. It looks pretty steep. But the two things that are changing here is that my slope is changing. It's getting steeper in the middle here, right? If you're a beginner skier, would you rather ski down this or that? I'm really going to milk this for all that it's worth, right? But there's something else that's changing. Up near the top and the bottom, my slope, what's happening to my slope there? It's actually decreasing. I'm getting less contrast in that area, right? Well, why am I doing that? Because if I was just doing linear contrast, I would end up with this type of situation where we're just crashing through the top and the bottom, right? So it's a way of mapping source dynamic range into target dynamic range, right? So the idea of, like, how do we perform a photometric contrast ratio adjustment? The simplest way to think about that is to increase your slope. Say, like, hey, the slope in the middle is going to go up. And that's why, like, in this previous iteration of my template node graph, I would do typically contrast pivot, but some of you guys may have seen this option before: project settings, general options, use S-curve for contrast, turned off, save. Because remember, as we just looked at, we were just looking at a plot of, like, our look plus our output transform. Those are all S-curves. Like, there's lots and lots of S-curve happening later. So this is one of the few areas where I typically, as a baseline, want to use a strong linear clipping contrast, because things are going to get rolled and compressed later anyway, okay? But if we think about this here, like, I would normally do contrast pivot, which is just going to be changing of the linear ratio. I think that's about as close as you can get to what you could think of as photometric contrast. I'll add one more idea to the mix for you here, okay? Oh, I'm so excited. I'm going to get to show you guys. Well, we'll see if it works, but there we go. Keyboard shortcut for flipping into linear, or Stream Deck shortcut for flipping into linear. That didn't take me much time at all to cook up, I promise. Well, actually, it didn't take that long, but that's because I'm primarily using a macro that one of our community members built, and then I just figured out how to make it work, even if my mouse wasn't hovering over that node. Anyway, I digress. I'm a geek. I think that's cool. When you're in linear, most of you guys already know about, or many of y'all probably already know that, like, when you're moving your gain up or down, that is exposure. That is photometric, right? If you do that in powers of 2, you get stops, right? So if I take my initial gain value and I multiply it by 2 to the power of 1, 1 being 1 stop, to get 2, I've now opened up this image by exactly 1 photometric stop, okay? So another idea for photometric contrast would be in your linear node to do gamma instead of gain, okay? Let's look at a plot on that. Love this grayscale ramp. Y'all probably already know that. Anyone who doesn't, grab this grayscale ramp. Do we have this? Christian, do you remember, do we offer this as a free download? I don't know why I expect you to know that off the top of your dome. If we don't, we'll get it for you guys soon because it's the most useful thing ever. I actually can show you a way to do it natively with the Resolve, but I find it super helpful to just have this little strip at the bottom so that I can see the image and the curve plot here in my waveform. But if we check this out, like we are now doing gamma in linear. Actually, let's do this. Where is my node that I flipped into linear? There we go. So here would be my linear gamma, okay? So this could be another way conceptually of controlling contrast in a photometric way. And you can combine that if you wanted with your gain. And you're now doing a sort of like photometric exposure adjustment. That would be one way to look at it. The other way to look at it would be like, all right, well, just what's my simple baseline contrast pivot going to be? Remember, if you set your pivot to the mid-gray of your system, which if you don't know this number off the top of your head because you're not a massive geek like me, you can get from my mid-gray cheat sheet, another free resource that should be available to you guys in the link for today's show description. If you pivot around 0.336, you're doing straight up linear contrast and you're not moving middle gray. So I think that's a really good foundational principle of adjusting contrast in a photometric way. And the last thing I'll say here before I shut up and move on to another question. There's a natural transition point, and it usually starts to come up when you're thinking about contrast, where we need to be thinking less about the scene, less about what's photometric, and more about the rendering of the image, the way it's shaped, the way that it feels on screen, in a way that has no direct relationship with what would have happened if we had changed some parameter or some fill ratio on the set. And instead it's just about, I'm just using my hands to make myself love this. You follow what I mean? So like that's one of the motivators actually behind moving off of this node tree that was the previous generation, the first 3 nodes of my previous node tree, into this. So now instead of having exposure and ratio, we are going to have in this new one, where are my trees at? Instead of exposure and ratio, we have prime. It's all in one thing. And this is just a node that I've gotten comfortable with. Like, yeah, I'm going to set exposure here. But after that, I'm just kind of freehanding with in this setup of the node tree, with my lift, gamma, and gain to try to shape out the image. I'm not actually thinking that much about the scene or about photometric. I'm just thinking about the image and about shaping the reproduction into something that I dig. Does that make sense? That's actually one of the motivators behind changing to this construction of the first 3 nodes versus the prior construction. Again, I think I answered your question and probably a few others, but hopefully interesting ones.
Okay, I've been color grading in Resolve for quite a while now, but I feel like I'm weak when it comes to look development. Most of the time, I rely on Kodak print LUTs, but they don't give me a satisfying feeling. It makes me feel like I don't really know what I'm doing. Do you have any advice for improving in this area?
Oh, this is a great question. So there's lots of things that you can do. The first thing that I would say is improvement in this area is it's maybe going to look and feel a little bit different than what you're describing, because you're saying like, oh, I use these Kodak emulations and I don't feel in control. Like that's the itch that you're experiencing. I think like everybody in the chat, let your buddy know who asked the question here. Anybody who's further along in that look development journey who hasn't had that itch, I think we all get that itch. Like that's one of the main drivers to building a skilled look development practice. So in that sense, you already have one of the important ingredients, which is that bothers you at all. Like I know plenty of colorists who are just happy to work from a library of reliable looks and they have no interest in going deeper than that. So you already have one of the important precursors, which is an appetite to go further. But here's what I would say. Once you start going further in that area, and I'm going to give you a prescription for how to go further in just a moment, but once you start going further, a big principle that I talk about a lot when I teach look development is take those looks, whether it's your Kodak emulations or whatever out of the box looks that you like. It might be my Kodak emulation, it might be some other film emulation, it might be my Voyager LUTs, it might be like some other like look LUT that you love to use. Instead of saying like, I'm sick of those things, I want to control it, I don't want to be just a consumer using some other product, use those things. Like first of all, the first observation, like, it doesn't make you any less of a colorist if you are using a good look well to get a great image. Like, not at all. Like, look development is a different skill, and it is not, doesn't take away from or diminish color grading as a skill. Okay. So you are not cheating or phoning it in or in some way inferior because you're not building that look yourself. That's the number one thing to understand. Why that's important to understand is when you understand that, you can continue to use those looks, and you should. And the way you should use them, I did this for, gosh, a year, maybe 2 years when I first had the same itch that you're describing, and I started getting into look development. I started saying, yeah, but I want to build this. And there was way less resource for me at the time than it is for you guys now. And I'm going to, again, walk you through some of those resources in a minute. But I had no resource, so I'm just kind of like fumbling around, like, how do I build looks? Do I do it in Resolve? Do I use like Lattice to try to create a look and adapt something from some other LUT and like mash LUTs together to get something interesting? Like, I was just groping my way through the dark, trying to find a way to be a participant in that look creation process, not just a beneficiary of that look creation process. And what you'll find is, like, for a year plus, you can't beat the looks that you really like. Maybe your timeline will be shorter than mine. I hope it is. But for some period of time, you're going to be like, dude, I'm trying, but I can't beat this look that I really like. That shouldn't be surprising to you because you really like that look. You picked it out, right? So instead of seeing it as an adversary, instead of seeing it as something that, like, oh, it's like this addiction that I have to like immediately get out of my life, keep using those looks and using those LUTs and use them as your context for, like, I got to do something that looks better than this. Until I do, I'm going to keep practicing. But when I'm grading, when I'm doing work, I'm going to keep using this thing because it looks awesome, right? So that's what I mean when I say it might look and feel a little bit different than what you're expecting. It's not a matter of saying, I don't want to do this, real colorists wouldn't do this, or it makes me lesser a colorist that I am using this third-party LUT that I don't have control over. So I'm going to stop that and start doing look development on my own instead. The only thing you're going to get out of that is inferior results, because right now you are not as good at look development as you are not good enough at look development to build a look that is as good or better than that one today. But you can get better at that, and that's what I want to talk about now. So there are lots of different resources out there. Like, I don't even follow all of them. You can grab a free trial of it, play around with it, see how you like it, see if it makes sense to you. As soon as you do, you'll have access to the manual. You can hover your cursor over literally any option within this entire set to get a better sense of it. I talk about contour, and I've done like dives on contour here on the channel. And then if you're like, hey, this makes sense, I feel like I can get great looks out of it. There's a great sort of training wheel step that you can use with contour that I already used today. I imported one of my looks right into the plugin, like this bleach bypass, for example. And now there's a look. It's in there. And what's fun is you can see the ingredients that went into that look, and you can learn something from it. Okay. So you can play around with all that, see how it feels. If you like it, grab Contour, because in addition to being an amazing look development tool, you are going to get a free 2-day look development deep dive course on how to do look development and how to use Contour to do it. It's like an incredibly efficient way of leveling up your look development game and setting yourself up with the ideal tool to do so along the way. I say all that because I mean it. I built this tool for myself. This was really like Contour. The way Contour started was like, we should really organize all of the like bits and pieces and tools that I'm using to do my look development, because everyone's asking me about them. Everyone wants to use them, but right now they're like in this like hot rod sort of half-built thing that only I know how to navigate, only makes sense to me. So really the challenge was, can you distill all this tool set down into something that makes sense to the user and is user-friendly and doesn't require like a more of a tool development mindset as opposed to a tool user mindset or a look development artist mindset. That's where Contour came from. So that's why I say to you guys with such confidence, like, it's an amazing tool for performing look development, and it will actually, if you let it, teach you look development because it has these 5 modules. So that would be my encouragement as a great place to get started. Go grab the trial and play around with it, and there's a whole sort of flight path you can take from there. And then other than that, Google around, see what else you can find. If you want to just more informally learn, you've got a lot more resource than I did, which was basically zero. Some of what the information that you find is going to be great. Some of it's going to be less than great, but that's more what my journey was, is picking, like consuming the good and the bad and slowly figuring out like, I don't think that was great advice because I'm not really getting great results out of it, versus going like, hey, that's working today and it feels like it's continuing to work. So I'm going to take that advice and incorporate it into my practice. So hopefully that's some good ideas for you for getting stronger in this look development area.
Is color balance is color balance and contrast the only way of making footage look clean in as far as to create clear distinct between colors and make footage look sharper? I think they're talking about color separation.
Cool. This is a juicy question. I hope, by the way, like, especially for you guys who are like hanging on the reg here in grade school, when you guys are seeing questions drop in, don't wait for me to answer. Like, you can talk to each other about it. I know y'all do. I sometimes get jealous when I open up the chat. I'm like, man, I just want to like sit down and like have Christian or Annie come and teach so I can hang out and chat with you guys. So I know y'all do that already, but like when you hear good questions like this, either answer in the chat or just answer to yourself like, gosh, good question. Like, is that the only way? Let me give you my take. Not only is that not the only way, that's not even the best way. Like, that stuff primarily is going to come from your imaging pipeline. That's actually when we finish this call today, I've got some fresh content that I'm working on for you guys for the channel here that revolves around this very topic of like how we set up a foundation that guarantees those kind of outcomes or that strongly biases us toward those kind of outcomes. Like what we've got right now is a pretty good example right here. So check this out. If I turn off this look node that we were just playing with and talking about in Contour here, and I want to create, give it to me again, Chris. Give me the first part of that conversation, of the question, so I'm applying it right.
Is color balance and color contrast the only way of making footage look clean?
Okay, yeah, so color balance and color contrast. Yeah, so first of all, in terms of like color balance and color contrast, like we would think about those typically as grading adjustments, but what I'm about to talk about now is look development. But there's also a third thing of just contrast in general, and we could do a deep dive on like contrast is the thing, guys. Like shaping contrast, you could like distill all of color grading down into like it's just shaping contrast. And remember, contrast has many forms. It can be spatial, it can be tonal, it can be color. There's lots of different forms of contrast, and contrast is not an axis. It's not, do you want the small, the medium, or the large? Contrast, going on a tangent here, but highly related, and it's highly helpful to this conversation. Contrast is this. It's remapping the output at every input in a smooth way. You follow what I'm saying? If you don't have your notebook yet, 2 minutes left in grade school, grab your notebook, write this stuff down. I'm like so convicted about this lately in my own learning journey. Like if you don't write stuff down, you learn it, you get excited about it, and then you forget about it, or it goes into somewhere in the back vault of your brain and it doesn't actually end up getting applied. Write this stuff down. Contrast is not small, medium, or large. Contrast is what is my output for a given input and making sure that there's a smooth connection for all those points. Okay? So like that's the idea here. So there's lots of different contrasts that we can do. There's color contrast, there's tonal contrast, spatial contrast, lots of other things that we can do. But to go back to answering the question, we can definitely create popping images like through color contrast, through color balance as well. But when I hear that question, that makes me think of grading level decisions. And I think the first line of defense that we really have here is what we're doing in our look. So let's just do a quick example here. This will be kind of fun. Let's grab a still here, and I'm going to turn this off, and I'm going to do my best with this turned off to grade this shot up using the principles that we're talking about, okay? So let's reset this node, and let's go to our HDR and just play with exposure, see if I can make myself like it more than I already do. That's a great litmus test, is that even if I'm not going to, even if I don't see anything, I'm just going to spin it left and right to see, is there anything I want? In this case, I landed back perfectly at 0 by doing that, so that's a pretty good cue. I think you might be happy with exposure, dude. So let's go back over to our primaries now and start to work the adjustments there, okay? So because I didn't do contrast in my overall look, I'm just naturally, because of my eye, going to try and compensate for that, like so, okay? Let's go over to our balance node now. And kind of the same thing as the exposure. I may or may not see anything really wrong with the footage. Like in this case, like this looks fine to me. This is my base. But if I turn this back on, it's the same kind of thing. I'm just going to push things around and like see if I can make myself like it more. And this would be an example that we made before of like where actually reducing color contrast can be an ally as well. It's just a different taste. It's a different flavor, right? So like maybe that's interesting, especially if I can, you know, I don't have any cool warm split happening here because I don't have anything happening in my look. So instead I would have to do what what some colorists do, which is like in a node that I'm going to do separately from this balance node, kind of just freehanding that. So I'm going to like go just a little bit cool in my lift and then try to recover some warmth in the highlight. I suck at this, by the way, because I never do it because I think it sucks, but that's another conversation. So if we look at like something like that, maybe. Yeah, and here's a great example of where I'm like, yeah, that looks good. Let's just do less of it. So I'm going to pull back on the key output gain. So that's me trying to get a little bit of color contrast in, again, sort of trying to get it at the look or at the grade shot level because I didn't do it at the look level. So something like that. And then let's look at our SAT as well. So this is just a node with its color space set to HSV and channels 1 and 3 turned off. So I'm just manipulating the S, the saturation channel of HSV. And I can just take a look and see, like, is there anything I can do here to make myself like the image more? Probably not, because I've already pushed it warm. That's going to be my guess anyway. So like, it's probably pretty good right where it was. Like maybe a little bit of that and then pulling back on that balance a hair. So now like my net grade is something like that. And that's just me kind of freehanding, like, hey, make yourself like it without a particular like specific creative direction. Okay, let's reset this. Let's now go back over and look at turning this look back on. And then we're going to go back over here to the clip level. And we're going to do the same exercise. So let's look at our exposure. So I want to come up or down. Remember, like this choice, along with all the choices I'm about to make, they're going to change depending on your pipeline. Like my look is now in place. My choices may change. So I'm not just going to assume that the same grades I did a moment ago are going to be good. So I'm going to say, let's maybe go wherever that is. Yeah, so I'm actually ending up opening this up a little bit. Let's go over to our, and let's go back to our primaries here and just look at, I'm going to try to like really soften out my, I've got strong contrast now coming from my look, right? So I'm going to look at softening that out just in the bottom end of things while still keeping it strong in the top. So something like that maybe. And now I'm going to go back over to my exposure. Remember, exposure and contrast are highly interactive. So maybe something like that for my prime node, okay? Not as big of a change probably as the prime node adjustment that I made a moment ago, because more of that base preferred reproduction is being driven by my look than it was a moment ago, okay? Now let's go over to our balance. And same thing. Ugh, HDR palette, get out of my life. Prime, there we go, primaries. So can you guys see even this balancing adjustment, even if this was literally the same readouts on my gain, it's going to feel different under this look than it did a moment ago. Okay, so we'll do something like that. I no longer need to introduce a cool thing in the bottom because that's being driven at the look level. And if we look at our saturation, I'm like, I don't know, do we need to go up on here? Maybe a pinch. I don't know, maybe we want to do something like this and go kind of down in the middle and then up in the top. So I'm doing gamma down, gain up to get something like this. It's actually not making much difference, but it's kind of deepening those washing machines. That's kind of nice, right? Okay, so let's just compare. Like that's me trying in both cases just to get a good base image out of things. You guys see that? Like some of it's easy to describe, like, oh, the density on the washing machines is better. Like here's what we did without the look. Here's what we did with the look. Like in a lot of respects, I got to a similar place, but how many of us prefer this versus what I just did? And how many think, oh, the difference isn't meaningful? Like that's too small to notice. It's not like 100 feet tall, but it's a big difference. And I would venture most of us are going to prefer this, right? So that's my way of saying that, like the things that you listed off, like when you talk about balance and color separation and like color contrast and things like that, you can do those things at the look level, but we tend to think of those a lot as grading level things. But if you take your first line of defense of like, how am I going to get like a popping image out of this deal? You got to start with your look. Like I talk about this all the time. We talked about it in CCA this last round, the Colorist Accelerator course that just wrapped up. We want, by the time you start grading, you want to be pretty psyched about what you're seeing so that you're in this mode. Like when I'm under this look, you want to be in this mode where you're like, what do you want to see? Like what would be fun to try, as opposed to like, all right, what do we got to fix here? You know, like I know probably any of us who've spent any time grading at all have done projects like that where you just, okay, what are we going to fix? Okay, that's less shitty. Okay, on to the next shot. Do it again. You know what I'm saying? Like that's the way I learned how to color grade. It's way more fun if you are insisting to yourself, I want to dig it before I get started. And if any of you are saying like, I don't work with good enough footage for that, or like, that's not possible, that's not realistic, color grading plays too important of a role, here's what I would challenge you with. It is 100% not possible if you do not believe it is possible. If you believe you will need to step in, you will need to be the hero, the shot will not look good until you put your hands on that specific shot, then you are 100% right. But I can also tell you what I've learned in my career and what I've seen from every colorist who I've ever admired and had the chance to watch work up close. It is possible. They do dig what they're seeing. The image does look amazing before they even begin grading, as much as is possible. Like there's always going to be shots that are under or over or like poorly rated for color temperature or whatever. Like we still have a job to do, but if you're not fundamentally, more shots than not, looking at the shot at the foundation before you begin and going like, this looks great. What do you see? Where do you want to go from here? Then you're missing opportunities at the look level. So I hope that answers some questions about, so it gives you some ideas about your question of like where in your pipeline, where in your process you can introduce those advantageous variables. And also, as we mentioned earlier, just some other dimensions to think about things along. So you can think about, like color contrast, as you said. You can also think about tonal contrast, which I don't think was mentioned. You can also think about spatial contrast, which would be like, drawing a window over here on the lower right-hand side to shape things out. Like there's lots of ways to shape contrast, and contrast, remember, it is a discrete set of mappings of outputs based on inputs that smoothly all connect together. And whether you're talking about contrast for a saturation channel, contrast for your color contrast tonally, contrast for your, like the different geometry of your frame, they're all different applications of that same principle. So there's lots and lots of opportunity, and there's lots and lots of nuance to the way that we think about contrast and how it's shaped in all these areas. And that's color grading. And that's all I got for you guys today. Great session, guys. Really great questions. Great hanging out with y'all. Let me get this camera back full screen. Y'all are awesome. I hope you have a great rest of your Monday. I know I'm going to. I always leave grade school with lots of extra energy. Thanks to you guys. So thanks for turning up. Lots of fun stuff coming up here on the channel, and we'll see you for the next grade school session. Thanks to Christian and Annie for co-hosting with the co-mosting. See you guys.